Despite the cruelty of the crime, the sentence turned out to be surprisingly lenient for the perpetrator. The investigator who worked on the case noted that over the years of his career, he had interrogated hundreds of suspects, but for the first time he had to deal with a person whom he described as completely devoid of any emotion. Moreover, the detective emphasized that the investigation had suspicions about a probable accomplice who helped dispose of the body and possibly even dismember it. Let's consider the case of Caitlin Markham. In the cozy town of Fairfield, Indiana, lived 21-year-old Caitlin Markham. She was characterized as a somewhat eccentric personality, an exceptionally creative, kind-hearted and compassionate girl. From a young age, she was enamored with art and was constantly in search of fresh ideas for her creative projects. In 2011, Caitlin was studying in the graphic design department at the Ohio Institute of Art, located in Cincinnati, and also worked part-time at a local bridal salon. Caitlin had been in a relationship with her fiancé, John Carter, for about 6 years. A year before the events described, they got engaged and were already planning their life together in Colorado. John, like Caitlin, was a creative person. He was engaged in the art of glassmaking. In August 2011, Caitlin had only a few days left until her 22nd birthday, mere weeks until graduation, and just a few months until moving and getting married. Her life was filled with grand plans and expectations, so when she suddenly stopped responding to communication and her phone immediately forwarded to voicemail, it caused considerable concern. After a day without any news from Caitlin, John decided to check on her at home. Her car was parked near the house, but there was no one inside. John did not notice any signs of break-in or disarray. Caitlin's mobile phone was also missing, and the pet was left unattended, which alarmed John. On August 14 at 8 p.m., John called the emergency services and reported his fiancée missing. He explained that he last saw her the night before around midnight when he was leaving her house. Caitlin was staying at home and was not going anywhere. The next morning, she did not respond to his message, and later her phone stopped accepting calls altogether. The police officers who arrived at the scene immediately noticed the scratches on John's neck. At first, he claimed that they were traces from shaving with an electric razor, but then admitted that he didn't actually know where they came from, yet insisted that there was nothing suspicious about it. John maintained that due to worry and anxiety, he could not sleep properly and only wanted Caitlin to return home as soon as possible. Caitlin's family, particularly her father Dave and younger sister Ellie, also had no idea about her whereabouts. Her father noted that she had always been a purposeful and responsible person, had clear plans for the future, and simply could not have disappeared like that without warning. After a thorough investigation, the police did not find evidence to consider John a suspect and switched to other versions. Large-scale searches began in the town. Over 100 people, including police officers, volunteers, and firefighters, combed the streets, wooded areas, and surrounding territories. They distributed flyers with Caitlin's photo and collected any information that could help the investigation. Instead of celebrating the girl's birthday, her loved ones spent these hours searching, trying to figure out where she could have gone. John claimed that Caitlin was the love of his life, and he simply could not believe that she had vanished without a trace. Caitlin was last seen on Saturday evening. According to John, he left her house around 11:30 p.m. About an hour later, she sent him a message with a photo, and that was the last confirmed contact with her. When Caitlin did not show up for work at the bridal salon, it became clear that something unusual had happened. Her colleagues and friends raised the alarm, realizing that she would never have disappeared just like that, without any explanation. John continued to send Caitlin messages, but there was no response. He tried to call, but no one picked up the phone. He could not fathom how she could have just up and vanished. After all, Caitlin had always been extremely responsible and would never have done such a thing. Fear gripped him. He could not find peace, because she had planned to celebrate her birthday at a restaurant, and he hoped that he would still be able to do it together with her. The police reported that there were no signs of struggle or disarray in Caitlin's house. The only things missing were Caitlin herself and her mobile phone, the location of which could not be determined. It was also known what she was last wearing, a gray t-shirt. Other details caught the attention of the volunteers who joined the search. Analysis of the mobile operator's data showed that messages were sent from Caitlin's phone to John between 11:04 p.m. and 11:36 p.m. After that, at 12:06 a.m., the phone was turned off, ran out of battery, or the SIM card was removed. The trail ended there. The police officers questioned the manager of the local branch of Jack Credit Union, who said that 3 weeks before the disappearance, on July 20, 2011, Caitlin had come there together with John's mother. The girl was going to get a credit card, and her fiancé's mother was ready to be a guarantor. During the conversation, the manager heard the woman jokingly say that she would sign the documents, but only if Caitlin took her son with her to Colorado. At the same time, Caitlin did not react to this humorous remark in any way, did not even smile, and seemed lost in thought. In the end, the credit card was never issued. Another witness told law enforcement that he spent the evening of August 13 in the company of Caitlin and John. They were discussing their moving plans, while Caitlin was sitting at her laptop, busy with her studies. According to the witness, she seemed absorbed in her thoughts and not as energetic as usual. He left her house around 10:45 p.m., leaving Caitlin and John alone. The witness also noted that he did not notice any scratches on John's neck, but admitted that he might simply not have paid attention to it. And although polygraph results cannot be used in court as evidence, this witness agreed to take a test, which confirmed that he was telling the truth. On the night of August 13 to 14, 2 local teenagers who had secretly left the house told the police that they saw 2 cars moving with their headlights off near Caitlin's house. However, no one else confirmed this observation, so the investigators had no other leads. The news of Caitlin's disappearance quickly spread throughout the country. In the small town of Fairfield, with a population of just over 40,000 residents, such incidents were extremely rare. Search groups were organized, large-scale events were held, and volunteers combed every corner of the city and its environs. A national search group from Texas joined the investigation, exploring wooded areas, bodies of water, abandoned railway lines, and other potential locations of the missing person. Caitlin's family did not lose hope and regularly appealed to local media for help. John also did not hide from the public, but many continued to treat him with suspicion. He insisted that he was not involved in the disappearance and was fully cooperating with the investigation, providing all necessary information. However, the feeling that almost everyone considered him guilty did not leave John. Caitlin's remains were found under a pile of garbage. Cuts made by something sharp were found on her left wrist. One of them had a V-shape and damaged the surface layer of the bone. Unfortunately, apart from this, there was no other evidence that could help reconstruct the events of that day. The exact cause of Caitlin's death was never established, but investigators classified it as a homicide. Her phone was never found in that area. After many months of waiting, Caitlin's family was finally able to hold a funeral. The girl's works adorned the walls of the mourning hall, and all those present were dressed in bright colors in her memory. Many people gave speeches, remembering Caitlin as a kind and creative person. John also spoke, telling about their plans for a life together and dreams of starting a family. John's cousin recalled Caitlin with affection, calling her a person who always strived for goodness and friendship. Dave, Caitlin's father, noted that for their family it was a kind of closure, but he felt immense sadness for Caitlin's younger sister, who was still very young at the time of her older sister's disappearance. The location where Caitlin's remains were found complicated the already difficult investigation. Her body was in another state, so investigators had doubts whether it had been left there initially. 2 police departments had to join forces in the search for answers. The beginning of 2015 did not bring significant progress in the investigation. Despite a $75,000 reward for any substantial information, the case gradually faded into the background. Dave, Caitlin's father, managed to convince the Butler County Sheriff's Office to reconsider the circumstances of his daughter's disappearance. The investigation was transferred from the Fairfield Police Department to the sheriff's investigators. He hoped that a fresh look at the case would help solve it, as he feared that Caitlin's disappearance would remain unsolved. Dave also hired private detective J. Ryan Green, who began studying Caitlin and John's circles. He interviewed over a dozen people, 5 of whom agreed to take a polygraph test, with the exception of John Carter. Eventually, the circle of suspects narrowed down to 2 individuals. One of them failed the lie detector test, which drew particular attention to him. In 2016, the police announced that they had a suspect who was of interest to the investigation, but there was insufficient evidence for an arrest. The private detective also noted that his suspicions coincided with the conclusions of the police. 12 years had passed since Caitlin's disappearance, and in 2023, the investigation finally moved off the ground. Investigators announced the first arrest. A man named Jonathan Powman was detained. He was charged with providing false testimony. The private detective noted that the investigation was now moving in the right direction, and he had the opportunity to obtain a search warrant. Jonathan Powman, Caitlin, and John Carter belonged to the same social circle and knew each other well. Powman lived near Caitlin's house, and he and John had close friendly ties. Moreover, on the day Caitlin was declared missing, the first person John called was none other than Jonathan. Before arresting Powman, law enforcement officers conducted searches in 2 buildings. One of them was the residence where he lived in 2011, during the period of Caitlin's disappearance, and the other was the house where John Carter lived with his mother. Jonathan Powman will have to appear in court to provide testimony regarding his role in this case, while investigators continue to gather new evidence. The investigation also mentioned the name of Michael Strauss, who was acquainted with Jonathan and John Carter. Michael had previously pleaded guilty to stalking and assaulting another girl. After Michael Strauss was excluded from the circle of suspects, investigators continued to focus their attention on John Carter. He avoided contact with the media from the moment Caitlin's remains were found, trying not to draw unnecessary attention to himself. Over the years, he managed to get married and start a family, but the police's interest in his person did not fade. The collected evidence did not add up to a complete picture. His testimonies repeatedly contradicted each other. Suspicion intensified after it became known that the cars teenagers saw near Caitlin's house on the night of her disappearance belonged to John and an unidentified person. That same night, her phone and his phone were turned off simultaneously, which also seemed suspicious. In addition, the police discovered that part of the correspondence between John and Caitlin from 8 p.m. to 8:36 p.m. had been deleted from his device. The messages he claimed to have sent, including the morning greeting, were not actually recorded by the operator's network. John underwent a polygraph test 3 times, in September 2011, February 2014, and January 2021. Each time, the results indicated signs of deception, especially when it came to the question of whether he had moved Caitlin's body. During a search of his mother's house, police officers seized several items, including his notes on the investigation, a folder with Caitlin's documents, a memory card, and poems with gloomy content. One of the poems was about love turning into hatred and thoughts of taking a life. In addition, investigators found material similar to the one in which Caitlin's body was wrapped, and the place where she was found was located not far from a farm owned by the Carter family. Witnesses described John as a quick-tempered person prone to aggression. The police had video recordings at their disposal in which he yells at his wife while holding their little daughter in his arms. When investigators presented him with this evidence, John showed no particular emotion and only noted that it was all circumstantial evidence. However, by that time, the police had already accumulated a sufficiently solid evidence base to transfer the case to the prosecutor's office. In March 2023, John Carter was arrested at his workplace and charged on 2 counts. The first concerned the intentional causing of Caitlin's death between August 13 and 14, 2011. The second was the commission of a crime that led to her death. He was released on $1 million bail and was required to wear a GPS tracker. During the same period, Jonathan Powman, who was awaiting trial on charges of providing false testimony, was released from custody. However, the charges against him were soon dropped. In June 2024, a hearing in the John Carter case is scheduled to take place. For over 10 years, the Caitlin case remained an unsolved mystery, but now it seems to have finally come close to a resolution. John Carter pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, which was in accordance with the laws of the state of Ohio. Dave, Caitlin's father, experienced conflicting emotions. On the one hand, his suspicions about John's involvement were confirmed, but this knowledge only intensified his anger. For many years, Carter lived as if nothing had happened, continuing his life, while Caitlin's family fought for justice. In court, Carter admitted his involvement in her death but refused to disclose the details of what happened. One of the inmates told detectives that John had allegedly confessed to him how it all happened. According to him, an argument broke out between them, during which he knocked her to the floor and strangled her, after which he began to panic, pondering whether to call the rescue service. In the end, he decided to stage the event as self-harm, inflicting injuries on her. However, John himself never told the investigators about this, and this version remains unconfirmed. Despite the severity of the crime, the punishment turned out to be surprisingly mild. The court sentenced him to the maximum penalty under the presented article, 3 years in prison with subsequent supervision for 3 years. John Steve, who worked on the case, noted that during his career, he had interviewed hundreds of people but had never before encountered a person whom he described as completely devoid of emotion. He also emphasized that the investigation had suspicions about a possible accomplice who helped dispose of the body and possibly dismember it, but this could not be proven. Although Caitlin's family received an answer to the question of who was guilty, the full picture of events remained a mystery. John never tried to explain what happened that night. Dave doubted that he would ever learn the truth, but even if Carter decided to write a confession in prison, it would be difficult for him to believe it after so many years of lies. Soon Carter will be released, and for Caitlin's family, this realization was especially painful. They felt that justice had not been fully restored. 14 years after her disappearance, a memorial event dedicated to her life was held in a local park. Trees were planted, and participants came dressed in clothes with butterfly images. Caitlin had loved them since childhood. Dave recalled that butterflies had become a symbol of her presence for him. He said that sometimes, especially in difficult moments, he would see a butterfly flying nearby, and it would remind him of her. Dave could not come to terms with the fact that even after so many years, he still did not know the whole truth. Every day he thought about Caitlin and her unrealized future. He was convinced that her talent would have led her to great achievements. But now, instead, all that remained for him was to look at other people's paintings and think that one of them could have belonged to her. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.